Yeah, okay, so it's Avish here. Today I wanted to talk about this book that I've been reading recently called Paper Belt on Fire by Michael Gibson. The book follows Michael's journey, so he joins Peter Thiel's investment fund, then proposes the Thiel Fellowship along with Danielle Strackman, and then Michael and Danielle go on to build their own investment fund called 1517. The whole point of the Thiel Fellowship is that you give $100,000 to either a high school or university student to build a company that solves an important problem for the world. They don't advocate dropping out per se, but they do encourage working on problems with a sense of urgency or problems that need to be solved now. And so what tends to happen is that most people drop out. That initial 100,000 is about bootstrapping the company. I imagine the Thiel Fellowship also provides a network of people that can help scale up the company as it develops. And the whole incentive behind funding young people is that rather than going to university and working on courses and modules that you're not necessarily going to use in your actual job, why not just get to working on the problem straight away? You know, when you think about it, it's a little bit batshit that they just invested in people who don't have any credentials. But I think it's testament to how good they are as investors that they can see the potential of these people, and just wanted to support that. So I'm in Berkeley right now. Got the views behind me. The overall thesis of the book is that science and wisdom are all amazing things. The rate of science is flatlined. Failure of the education system is a source of this stagnation, and our fate depends on replacing and reforming these institutions. Dramatic. Kernels of truth, for sure, but dramatic. One of the problems that they discuss is on the higher education bubble, and so this is the fact that there's an excessive supply of college graduates, but basically not enough demand for them, and that's exacerbated by the fact that you have so many people getting college degrees now versus before. The difference is now is that even if you have a college degree, it doesn't necessarily distinguish you from another person, especially if you've done a more popular major. So there's this whole issue, and they talk about how exactly they'd solve it. A financial kind of solution would be something like shorting that bubble, but you can't really do that, and it feels disingenuous because it's something that should be something pure, right? It's education, and there's no way to really invest I think it's like $1.7 trillion of student debt that they describe in the US at least. For them, the solution has to come from changing the way that we do education. And that leads them to then go and develop. The author of this book, Michael Gibson, goes and works at the Thiel, Peter Thiel's investment fund. And then from there, they develop the Thiel Fellowship. This is a good place to do a vlog, isn't it? Jesus Christ. I'm not sure if I fully agree with a lot of their diagnoses of the problem. Like, they were saying that there's this sort of great stagnation in terms of technology and science development from what it was before. I think to some extent that's true. I think it's just gotten more diffuse. So like the average level has gotten up. Maybe there's a few less of the extreme like greats. Like there's probably not going to be like another Microsoft in tech, for example, or another Apple in tech. Might be one in biotech, might be one in climate, something like that. But when it comes to the other stats that they give, like versus the 1900s, founders are doing their like great discoveries, or scientists are doing their great discoveries later in their career. But I don't think they really take into account the life expectancy. Like life expectancy in the 1900s or 1920s or whatever was like 40, 50 years old, if that. Now it's like 70, 80 in most Western countries, as far as I'm aware. In a lot of places in the world, to be honest. And I think it makes sense that people are doing their great discoveries or building their companies, whatever, later in their life. It makes a lot of sense to me that that would happen. I think it also allows people a chance to have a childhood or have more of a life before stepping into that. They have this strong issue as well with the paper belt, and that's the institutions that they really disagree with that go interlinked with these higher education institutions. And paper belt consists of media, think tanks, government, bureaucracy. I do sympathise. I do think that there is a lot of that isn't good and is slower than it needs to be, but it's always like a caricatured version. I guess you have to feel that way to even like propose the Thiel Fellowship, but at the same time, it just always seems a bit like melodramatic to me. They do make this one great point though, that economists don't really measure the rate at accomplishing what we once thought was impossible. And that's kind of this whole thesis. That's the whole thesis of this book, is to really get those few that will change the world into the room and give them the tools they need to help make that happen. There are a few interesting points as well on Peter Thiel. There's a lot of stuff that I don't agree with him on, but there's no denying that he's a great investor. And I did get some things wrong about him. Like, my idea of him is as this very libertarian guy, which he is, but that his team also was full of very staunch libertarians. But the author Michael Gibson, I think, is like an anarchist something. I want to say anarcho-capitalist. I'm forgetting the exact thing that he aligns with, but they're not all libertarians. the things that he really prioritizes is that he finds people who were used as scapegoats by a mob, basically people who had to take on a whole group of people or an institution, and who won that battle. And he really prioritizes individuality and people having their own thoughts above everything else. The way that he ran his venture fund was that people could go directly to him to pitch an idea. There's no kind of chain of command. He doesn't like hiring people who are in awe of him. He doesn't like people who try and just climb the ladder. I can respect a lot of that. It seems like a very flat institution because everyone just has their own way of doing things and is very individual. It's hard to see how exactly that works the most efficiently all the time. But the authors also make a point of that. They're like, yeah, of course there were some bad hires. There were people who didn't quite fit in. But when you look at the investments that the Thiel fund has made, like, it's hard to not say that it's a success, especially relative to other funds. But a lot of the thing about the Thiel Fellowship is based around giving young people agency, because they think that universities don't really serve what they should be doing, which is that they're kind of misaligned incentives between what universities are teaching versus what's actually creative in the real world, where you basically have to work with resource constraints and figure out how to get things done, basically. There's a lot of qualities that they talk about in founders. They can map out a sweeping vision for a whole field, figure out an incremental way to achieve that. They also have a certain charm about them, and they're able to explain these very difficult concepts to laymen. Very emotionally resilient people. They have emotional depth. They know how to work with other people and also weather the storms that come with running a company. All things that make intuitive sense. There was this one though that I found quite interesting, that they call alpha gamma tensor brilliance. That they have this kind of unity, this way of like bringing people together, that's borne out the fact that they've straddled two very different worlds in some way, whether that's in terms of the technical fields that they're bridging, in terms of the backgrounds that they're from, and they give the example of immigrant founders. The impression I got from it is that they have that innovation, that innovative streak, that creativity comes from being at the boundary of two different fields and being able to unite them together, and they're able to ride a lot of that uncertainty well because they have the emotional resilience, etc. That resonated a lot with me, you know, especially as an immigrant who wants to be a founder at some point in my life. It's quite an inspirational thing to hear. It's like a very motivating thing to hear, because I've come roundabout to those conclusions, not always been able to deal with the uncertainty in the best way, but like now at this stage of my life, I feel like I understand my Indian heritage a lot better, as well as my British heritage and the other aspects of growing up in the UK. For example, the bits of America that we get, the bits of Europe that we get, as well as being part of machine learning, but also healthcare, and understanding the limitations between those two, understanding the gaps in my knowledge as well, and where it would be a lot more helpful to get other people on board who understand those things better than I do. Yeah, that part really resonated with me. I agree fundamentally with the thesis of the book of there is this higher education bubble and there are ways that we can improve it. And they really want to prioritize not just children's curiosity, but also self-directed exploration all the way throughout the education system, and I fully agree with that. I've learned so much more being on the PhD and having to do research stuff, which is way more self-directed than I did doing any undergrad stuff. I was thinking a lot about how you would do this at a system-wide level. Like, how do you change the schooling system, the education system that we have to facilitate these young people with talent more? I guess the simple solution that I've kind of come around to is that you just need more project-based work earlier on, but project-based work that is more individual. The challenge there is then how do you evaluate it? How do teachers evaluate it if they're not trained in it? I guess it's that you want something out of it. You want some kind of end product that isn't necessarily just a report, but maybe you build some code, maybe you build some software, you go talk to people, you do interviews, you kind of like put yourself out into the real world more. And we probably need more channels for allowing that to happen. So I guess all of these VC funds and grants and accelerators, incubators, all of that kind of thing, they help that through financial resources and through the network. So getting the founders in contact with people who do know these things better and have kind of been through the hurdles, or at least similar hurdles, so that they can talk with them about it. But yeah, that I don't know how you do it at a school level where you have school systems that are already so budget constrained, where teachers don't get paid enough. But there has to be something there. There has to be something there. I don't know what the solution is. I'm not an expert in education or higher education or any of that kind of stuff, of course, but more project-based work in a way that fits within the resource constraints of schools and doesn't give too much overload to the people evaluating it, the teachers, whoever, I think would be great. I hope that's what we can get to. The Thiel Fellowship is one of the first examples of something really working when you give trust to young people. It's hard not to respect that. It's hard not to respect the overarching vision of like just allowing people to follow their curiosity, because that seems like a truer form of education than anything I've experienced other than in my PhD with amazing supervisors, and generally in research work with amazing supervisors who just let me explore and figure shit out. I learned a lot, I've been stupid a lot, I've occasionally been smart, I've occasionally surprised myself, and I think it's been as much of a character building exercise as it has something to teach me about the technical stuff of the field. So for all the criticisms that I have and the way that they don't really outline the evidence completely accurately, I still think there's a lot to be learned from this book, and I agree with the overall thesis.